Hello everyone. I'm going to talk about serious games for active aging. This presentation is structured as follows. Firstly, you want to know why I'm doing this and what is my research question. Then I will delve into the concepts that were needed to understand this problem and how would I address it. Then the method and procedures undertaken, and I will end with the key results and implications for research. I don't know if your background is more related to the health or to the technology itself, but we have been assisting to many challenges for the human-computer interaction field. If in the 60s or 70s the ambition of human-computer interaction was too much focus on the product, and we had to concern with things like effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction of the product, then we moved on to the user experience, how the user feels, what it feels like using that product. But now we are going beyond that, and we want not only the user feels good with the product, but also that it has an impact on the well-being and quality of life. And this is a scenario that is not so much covered. And if you look at the applications for the European Commission, when we are talking about aging, the focus is recovery and the illness aspects, and not without prevention. And when Professor Ana Veloso talked about our experience with the older adults, and I had been on the field, okay, this target group is being covered, but there was a younger target group who were concerned about the aging issues, but nobody addressed it because was too much focus on the health issues. And the current solutions in the market, you maybe know Nintendo Brain Age or Kinect Exogames. For the universities of third age, the members were not satisfied with these products. Why? In my life, after retiring, why do I need to do maths and math problems? I do not have any problem with mental. I just want to be involved in the game scenario, but not doing a math problem or something. So we have to engage. Also, it's not very easy to talk about aging. There is aging bias towards this problem because too much focus on the functionality and the illness aspect. If you look at this image, some of you may check that there is a young lady, others can only see an old lady. So I chose this illusion because also the aging is a matter of perspective. We can consider the advancement on the chronological aspect, but this is a matter of perspective, how we face the aging process. So my research question was, in what way can game-based learning affect the perception of active aging? And for it, I had to understand what is active aging. And although too much focus was on health, it also involved questions as security and participation in society. Then what was meant by affect, and I have to delve into affective and positive computing, and the play, the gamification, the game product. And it was difficult for me at the beginning to how can I talk about to a digitally mediated product and then relate to such psychosocial variables such as well-being and quality of life. But if we get that into detail, we see that games and other such digital are sources of information and communication. And this demands cognitive process from us. So this makes sense because our cognitive process are the ones that can have an impact on well-being and quality of life. So first of all, I involved 33 adult learners at the University of Third Age. I conducted code design sessions with them, and if on a website, for example, I can involve my end users with techniques associating metaphors to the icons, etc. In games, that is not easy because we have researchers and practitioners that consider games as an art form as a result of the team. So when can we involve the end users in this process? So we created this framework, considered the game embryo, in which it is the ideation process. And this is when we involve our end users. And for validating the content, we also need expert reviews from the health sector, for example. Then we have the lab microscope. That is when the end users are not involved at all. This is when the people that were on the field go and collect information about the context, and this is the information around. This is the information that I collected in the field. How do they solve problems, interaction patterns? If I use an interaction for the computer, that which point and click, mouse-based is for point and click, but if I use keyboard, there are not so familiarity with game conventions, so keyboard is for typing, those kind of things. And this is what is brought to the lab microscope phase by personas, creating personas. And then we need to verify the game DNA, if what we have corresponds to the game embryo. And then I developed a prototype, and we test with 40 adult learners in order to check what has done could meet their needs. And finally, because we is not only doing research, but if this can be done by the industry, that was the work I had done at the DML. We involved nine researchers and people from the industry, from the game industry, to get their perspective on the use of games and changes in behavior and for active aging. So this was the game premise. Saul, the fisherman of the city, is tired of getting stuck to a routine that he never got used to. Depressed and isolated, Saul has to face the storyteller, Nubble, who forces him to a time travel experience. Although this game premise was done by the designer team, we took into account things like what was the motivation of our target group. They liked to travel, okay? The type of narrative of the game history-based elements and history-based narrative was preferred. So although we had to take into account the game creativity, we had brought the context of our players into play. So the game covered such topics as nutrition, with the scenario of London 1895. So Thomas Allison was a doctor, but also called a quack, and we brought this history-based scenario in order to introduce topics about nutrition. Another scenario was Heisen, Japan, in the samurai era, in order to introduce mindfulness and topics relative to the physical activity, okay? And Paris 1948, relative to the human rights, the human declaration of the Declaration of Human Rights, in order to introduce things like security and participation in society. So this is an example of when we entitle games for active aging, we should not only focus on heal recovery and health. There are much more in order to fulfill that concept. And because if we want to answer how can games be affect, we have to compare with other platforms in which the information is distributed in a more linear way, okay? For example, in videos, the information is distributed in a more linear way. So we compared, and although differences were not found between groups, relative to, we applied the scales of quality of life and health-related well-being. There were differences relative to mental health and general health-related well-being. So we had to consider those factors into account when designing such games. In order to foster confidence in daily life, we have to consider factors such as environment and mental factor. In order for decreasing aging bias and participation in society, we have to add a psychological factor. There are other variables such as emotional, social factors that were not correlated, okay? And why this is important? Because we do not have a scale, an instrument for either designing and assessing technological-mediated products and their effectiveness. So we have to consider either the well-being and quality of life factors and design factors. So this was in what way the game could be better to foster active aging, was to, according to the participants, was to foster their confidence to solve daily life problems. How? Through meta-memory was one of the aspects. It's not only important to have cognitive challenges, for example, but how was the performance? How is my memory? So quantifying this aspect. Providing immediate feedback. If I provide immediate feedback towards an action, I want to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, and that generates an habit. and that fosters my confidence towards problems, and establish a link to the challenges of daily life. Another aspect was fostering a positive attitude towards aging, how through the avatars and the history-based narrative, because it creates a link between the avatars and the people. So through the empathy, as Michael mentioned at the beginning, was also observed in this study. And not so developed was the participation in the community, because we did not introduce any link with the social media. So it was one of the criteria that participants said that it was not so covered, okay? And find solutions to problems. How we did that? Through scaffolding, introducing easier challenges at the beginning and then going up. Reward task management, beyond doing, okay, you did right, also rewarding, okay, you progressed in the history, or in the story of the game. And train memory and attention over speed, of course, and through emotional engagement through the use of sound, aesthetics, and so on. These were some of the weaknesses of the prototype. Number of hints and tutorials should be reinforced, because participants read, if I introduce the game, a game that say, go explore, nobody would do anything, because going to what is needed to do, the rules of the game are needed to be introduced. So although we introduce it, we should have provided more. Retrieve information without the need to replay. This is something that for anyone that wants to develop a game-based learning strategy is very important. It's not only playing and having information at the same time. We need to provide ways to retrieve the information after playing without the need to replay, and link the game to the daily life activities. So in the specific case of the activating, we have to take into account age cohorts, because not focus on age-related difficulties, and get participants familiar with the interface, of course. We also need to take into account the motivations of the players, as referred by Ana Veloso. But one thing, and because we also need to be aware, and this was something that the industry wants to know, is not how do we monetize the game, and something that the game strategies are implemented is monetizing according to the achievement of the game, and it should not be done, because it interrupts my gameplay experience and leave this to stand out from the crowd. Monetize the game to stand out from the crowd instead of the achievement of the game. So finally, and to summarize what I said, what has been the contribution of this study was to have it is the first attempt to have the factors that are needed, even of the design and the well-being and quality of life, in order to build an instrument either for designing and assessing digital games or any sort of digital mediated product for activating, okay? If you are then interested, you can have my contact. Thank you for your attention. And